Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about how big a compressor you need for your paint gun. Alright, so I'm titling this video, What Compressor Do You Need for Your Paint Gun? But realistically, I know that kind of the idea here is most of you want to try and get away with the smallest compressor that you can. Because big compressors are expensive, right? And paint guns tend to take a lot of air. And I know nobody's got, well, no, I don't know how much money you have, but I assume most of you don't have a ton of money to spend on a giant compressor. So what we're going to talk about are, the basic requirements and then some tricks for getting away with using a smaller compressor than you might otherwise need. So generally speaking, a gun has two requirements. It's got a CFM, cubic feet per minute, and where you are, it might be a different version of that measurement, but that's what they are here. So cubic feet per minute and a PSI, pounds per square inch. I say those are what they are here, but I'm in Canada and we're metric. Not really the point. So cubic feet per minute, CFM, that's your volume requirement. That's how much air you need to move. And pounds per square inch is the pressure you need to move it at. Now, as you increase the PSI requirement and you crank that up, you're gonna get kind of, they're inverse, okay? It is harder to move more volume at a higher pressure. You can move more volume at a lower pressure or less volume at a higher pressure. So you may get a compressor that can move 4 CFM at 100 PSI. When you drop it down to 26 PSI for your gun, hey, maybe it can move 8. And that is enough for most guns. Most large guns, full-size guns, are somewhere in the 6 to 10 range and usually somewhere in the 25 to 30 PSI range. So yeah, in order to keep a gun running properly, you need something that does at least that, okay? Now, if you're painting a car, for example, or something huge, you need to fulfill those requirements or your gun is not going to work properly. You need to be able to paint kind of a whole section of it at a time, obviously, in order to get your paint to flow out properly. And there's really no way around that. I assume most of you are not painting cars, or at least that's kind of my hope. If you're going to paint a car, I hope you kind of already know this stuff. So, conversely, if you're painting something like a guitar, it takes, 30 seconds to put on a coat? So you need a compressor that can keep up with your paint gun for 30 seconds. And then it has time to refill. In that case, there are some ways around having a compressor that fulfills the requirements of your paint gun. First one, you lose pressure and volume and everything the longer your hose is. So rather than using a 50-foot hose, if you get one, cut it down, put a barb in there, create, a 10, 15-foot hose, and you're gonna get less pressure drop, okay? So now it's gonna be easier for your compressor to keep up. Second, make sure you've got a decent sized tank, all right? So a compressor has a motor that puts out a certain amount of air, and that's all fine and good. And if the motor can keep up with your gun, awesome, off to the races. But if it can't, and you've got a tank full of air, that's all leeway. That's like a head start, right? You have to go through that tank full of air before it really matters if your compressor can keep up. So technically, if I had like a 100-gallon tank that was pressurized at 100 PSI, I could paint a guitar probably without a compressor. I would just hook up to the tank and use the air that's in there, and I might get all the way through it without ever having to recharge that. Sometimes you can buy tanks separately, but what I'm getting at here is you can use a compressor that's really considerably smaller as long as it can charge that tank, and then if you have a bigger tank that you can hook up to that, which you can buy, you can get away with a pretty small compressor in that case. A bigger gun requires a bigger compressor, but a smaller project, you can get away with the tank. That's kind of how that works. If you're using a minigun, you don't need to move as much air volume. If you're using an airbrush, you really hardly need to move any air volume. They use compressors that are this big for airbrushes sometimes. Still nice to have a little tank on there if you can. But hey, you can get away with some pretty small stuff if you're just doing that. So if you wanted to, use a minigun to put your base coat, airbrush, and then do your clear coat with spray cans, you wouldn't need a very big compressor. So that kind of lays out the base requirements that you're going to need to fulfill and some ways around them. Like I said, smaller or shorter hose if you can. The diameter of the hose, don't be using like a 3/4 inch hose because that's going to move a lot of air and you don't really need that. 1/2 inch should be fine. And a bigger tank to make up for a smaller compressor. Hopefully that allows you guys to get through some paint jobs without having your gun spit or anything, and save some money. So as always, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please find an excuse to give it a thumbs up for me. I would appreciate that. And subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, I will see you next time. Have a good one.